Hello and welcome to Series 1 Part 2. Don't worry, I'm doing this video in parts as the whole video is almost 7 hours long and poor old PowerPoint can't handle the saving of a very large video. Please be patient and just read the sections that interest you the most. It's possible to advance through each slide by dragging the slider bar slowly along the progress bar situated at the bottom of your screen. When you're happy, please go to the next slide. Thank you. Interpretation 41.1. The following provisions of this clause shall have effect. Interpretation 41.1. The following provisions of this clause shall have effect in the construction of the scheme, the rules and the schedules to the rules. 2. The following words and expressions shall, unless the subject, the context Rule 9am otherwise require, have the meanings respectively assigned to them, that is to say, accounting year of the principal employer means any period from midnight of the last Saturday in March in one calendar year to midnight of the last Saturday in March in the next following calendar year. Actuarial value means actuarial value as determined by or on behalf of the actuary, and actuarially equivalent has a corresponding meaning. The actuary means the government actuary, being a Fellow of the Institute of Actuaries or of the Faculty of Actuaries in Scotland, appointed by the Committee of Management to perform the actuarial duties required under the scheme and the rules. Appointing union means an eligible union which for the time being has the power to appoint members of the Committee of Management by virtue of the provisions of Clause 21 of the scheme. Appointment date means the 1st of April in any year, and the first appointment date shall be the 1st of April, 1988. Associated undertaking means an undertaking, except, with effect from the 1st of October, 1977, a subsidiary, certified by the principal employer before the closure date to be associated with them, for as long as such certification remains in force and unrevoked, and all such certificates shall be revoked at the closure date. The auditors means the auditors appointed under Clause 14a. Bonus augmentations means benefits details of which are set out in the 9th schedule to the rules paid from the bonus augmentation fund which derive from a recommendation of the Committee of Management under Clause 18b as to the application of a share of surplus determined on a periodic review under Clause 18b on or after the guarantee date. Bonus augmentation fund means the bonus augmentation fund referred to in Clause 18b. Branch secretary means a whole-time secretary of any branch of the eligible unions. Certified employment means an insurable employment within the meaning of the Industrial Injuries Act, which was immediately before the termination of the Industrial Injuries Scheme certified for the purposes of that scheme by the principal employer and the union to be within the coal mining industry, or, if the principal employer and the union could not agree, was so determined by a decision then in force and made under Article 23 of that scheme or any provisions directly or indirectly replaced by it. Child in relation to a member or other person includes his posthumous child, stepchild, a child whom he has legally adopted, and a child for whose care and maintenance he was, in the opinion of the Committee of Management, responsible at the date of his death or such other date as the Committee of Management may consider relevant. Closure date means the later of a. The date on which the last restructuring scheme made by the Secretary of State under Section 12 of the 1994 Act comes into force, and b. The last date when the principal employer has employees who are members of the scheme, or such later date as the guarantor shall determine. Colliery accident means any accident happening to a colliery worker on or after the 5th of July, 1948 but before the 30th of March, 1970, and arising out of and in the course of his employment as a colliery worker, which is found by the authority by whom that question is to be determined under the Social Security Act or any statutory provisions directly or indirectly replaced by it to be an industrial accident as defined in Section 107(5). Of that Act or any statutory provision so replaced by that provision. Colliery disease means, in relation to any colliery worker, Any disease or personal injury prescribed under Section 76 of the Social Security Act or any statutory provisions directly or indirectly replaced by it in relation to the employment of that colliery worker, which a. before the 1st of January 1978 was determined in accordance with the Industrial Injuries Scheme or any provisions directly or indirectly replaced by it to be due to the nature of his employment as a colliery worker and to have developed on or after the 5th of July 1948 but, unless he was not a member of the scheme when it developed, before the 30th of March 1970, or b. insofar as it was not so determined, is due to the nature of such employment and has so developed, or if and insofar as is necessary is determined to be so due and to have so developed, in either case under and in accordance with the rules. Colliery worker means any person employed on or after the 5th of July 1948 but before the 30th of March 1970 in a certified employment, otherwise than as a clerical worker, in or about a colliery, other than an open cast working, or at a workshop, whether in or about a colliery or not, at which work is done wholly or mainly for one or more collieries, who is below the rank of under-manager or any similar grade and who is employed by the principal employer or a small mine licensee. Provided for the avoidance of doubt that for the purposes of this definition the expression coal mining activities in the definition of small mine licensee in this paragraph shall not include open cast working. Committee of Management means until the guarantee date the Committee of Management constituted in accordance with Clause 21 and with effect from the guarantee date means the Committee of Management or the Board of Directors of the trustee. Compound interest means compound interest with yearly rests. Contributing service in relation to any person means, subject as hereinafter provided and subject to the provisions of paragraph 2 of Rule 2. A. Service by him in eligible employment, which for the purposes of this definition shall be deemed to include any part of a scholarship period, on or after the 6th of April 1975 until he attains pensionable age or, if earlier, the transfer date but shall not include any period of strike absence occurring after February 1984. B. Where a transfer payment is made to the scheme from another occupational pension scheme in respect of that person under Rule 28, such period of contributing service, if any, as may be credited to him by virtue of such transfer payment, under and subject to the terms referred to in paragraph 2 of that rule on which such period of contributing service is so credited to him, and c. Any period of contributing service credited to him by virtue of the operation of Rule 3 or Rule 25. Provided that I. No period of service in eligible employment shall be taken into account more than once. 2. Except for the purpose of calculating any benefits payable to him under paragraph 5 of Rule 15 upon the termination of that period of service. No period of service in respect of which a contributions equivalent premium has been paid and has not been refunded or in respect of which a refund of contributions is, subject to subparagraph c. of paragraph 5 of Rule 15, paid or payable to him under subparagraph b. I. of that paragraph, or both, shall be taken into account, and 3. No period of service in eligible employment in respect of which earnings are received shall be taken into account unless normal contributions calculated by reference to those earnings are paid if due. In determining or calculating the period of contributing service in relation to any person, provided also that if the definition of contributing service in the scheme and rules as they stood prior to the 20th of November 1986 were applied to the calculation of any benefit earned or accrued prior to that date, that benefit would be greater than the amount of that benefit calculated on the basis of this definition. The definition in the earlier scheme and rules shall apply, but so that in the application of the definition in the earlier scheme and rules, any service in eligible employment during the period commenced on the 6th of April, 1975 and ended on the 29th of February, 1984 shall be accepted as contributing service notwithstanding that during any part of that period no contributions were paid by or on behalf of any person, and any such service on or after the transfer date shall not be contributing service. Contributions equivalent premium has the meaning assigned thereto by Section 42(1) of the Pensions Act. Crystallized augmentations means those benefits payable from the bonus augmentation fund referred to in Clause 18b, 5(2). Crystallized augmentation fund means the notional sub-fund which is part of the guaranteed fund attributable to liabilities in respect of guaranteed crystallized augmentations. Deficiency contributions means contributions payable by an employer under paragraph 2 or 3 of Clause 2. Dependent in relation to a member or other person means a. Any other person who is, or insofar as is relevant was at the date of death, retirement from or termination of service in eligible employment of that member or other person, financially dependent on him, and b. If and insofar as the Committee of Management in their discretion think fit, any child of that member or other person, other than a child who is or was a child of that member or other person solely because that member or other person is or was in the opinion of the Committee of Management responsible for such child's care and maintenance, who does not satisfy the conditions specified in paragraph a of this definition but is for the time being under the age of 18 or undergoing full-time education or vocational training or both. Earnings in relation to any person. A. Means the aggregate of I. The total weekly emoluments of that person within the meaning of Section 183 of the Income and Corporation Taxes Act 1970 from eligible employment assessable under Schedule E of the said Act, before any deductions of reliefs under that Act or for the purposes of that schedule, which shall include or if and insofar as may be necessary shall be deemed to include sums payable to that person by reference to eligible employment. B. By way of maternity pay. C. In respect of arrears of pay in pursuance of an order for reinstatement or re-engagement. D. By way of pay in pursuance of an order for the continuation of a contract of employment, or E. By way of remuneration in pursuance of a protective award. Under the Employment Protection, Consolidation, Act 1978. 2. The total weekly payments to that person in relation to trade union activities in relation to any week beginning not earlier than the 1st of January, 1976 and not later than the transfer date. 3. If that person so elects, the total weekly payments to that person in relation to trade union activities in relation to any week beginning not earlier than the 6th of April, 1975 and not later than the 31st of December, 1975 or including either of those dates, and 4. The total weekly payments made to that person in relation to inspection activities in relation to any week beginning not earlier than the 1st of October, 1976 and not later than the transfer date. B. During any period before the transfer date which is a scholarship period in relation to that person, means his earnings, if any, calculated in accordance with the foregoing provisions of this definition provided that if there are no such earnings, other than any earnings falling within the provisions of paragraph A, 2, 3, or 4, that person's earnings shall be deemed to be the following. I. If during his last period of service in eligible employment before the commencement of that scholarship period he was subject to the decisions of the coal mining industry of Great Britain conciliation scheme established by an agreement between the principal employer and the union dated the 5th of December 1946 or of the coal mining industry of Great Britain ancillary undertakings coke and by-product group conciliation scheme established by an agreement between the principal employer and the union. Dated the 5th of February, 1948, as amended, a weekly amount equal to 5 times whatever shall have been the appropriate national standard grade rate or inclusive standard shift rate or the national standard rate for age for juveniles applicable to him immediately before the termination of such period of service, or 2. In any other case, such comparable weekly amount as the pensions officer may determine having regard to that person's basic rate of emoluments immediately before the termination of his last period of service in eligible employment before the commencement of such scholarship period. And so that any reference in the rules to the amount of any earnings in relation to any person in respect of any period before the 6th of April, 1978 but not any subsequent period shall include the value of any part of such earnings not consisting of money payments, and in respect of any period on or after the 29th of February, 1976 shall not include any payment or allowance in lieu of concessionary coal or any amount calculated by reference to any such payment or allowance. C. In respect of any period of strike absence in respect of which a member has elected to pay special contributions in accordance with Rule 3 shall mean the amount of his estimated earnings. Eligible employment in relation to a. Any period of employment on or after the 6th of April, 1975, means, subject to the provisions of paragraph 2 of Rule 2, regular full-time employment, including any employment which would have been regular full-time employment had the person employed not been engaged in trade union activities or inspection activities or both, before the transfer date. I. By an employer other than an associated undertaking of a person who is eligible, or would if he were under pensionable age have been eligible, to become a member of the scheme by virtue of Rule 1, or 2. By an associated undertaking, subject to the provisions of paragraph 3 of Rule 2, of a person who was immediately or within not more than 1 month before entering such employment a member of the scheme by virtue of previous employment with the principal employer, a subsidiary or another associated undertaking, provided that in the case of a person who entered the employment of the first mentioned associated undertaking before the 6th of April, 1975 he has satisfied the conditions for continued membership of the scheme specified in paragraph 3 of Rule 3 of the rules as they had effect immediately before the 6th of April, 1975. And so that during any period of time before the transfer date in respect of which a person is entitled to be remunerated by the principal employer by virtue of the provisions of the agreement dated the 9th of April, 1958 between the principal employer and the union relating to attendance by nominated workmen at the place of certain occurrences, that person shall for the purposes of this paragraph, of the definition of employer in this rule and of subparagraph A, of paragraph 2, of Rule 1b, treated as employed by the principal employer or, if that person is normally employed by a small mine licensee, by that small mine licensee. B. Any period of employment before the 6th of April, 1975 means employment which constituted eligible employment under or as defined by the scheme and the rules as they had effect from time to time before that date. Any period of such employment on or after the 3rd of April, 1961 being calculated in accordance with Rule 9 of the rules as they had effect immediately before the 6th of April, 1975. Provided that, subject in the case of I, below to subparagraph E, 2, of paragraph 3, of Rule 27. I. Except insofar as it is credited to him as qualifying service under subparagraph C, of paragraph 1, of Rule 7, no period of service during the period beginning on the 3rd of April, 1961 and ending on the 5th of April, 1975 in respect of which a payment in lieu of contributions has been made in pursuance of the National Insurance Act or any statutory provisions directly or indirectly replaced by it, and 2. Except for the purpose of calculating any benefits payable to him under paragraph 5 of Rule 15 upon the termination of that period of service, no period of service in respect of which a contributions equivalent premium has been paid and has not been refunded or in respect of which a refund of contributions is, subject to subparagraph C, of paragraph 5, of Rule 15, paid or payable to him under subparagraph b, I, of that paragraph, or both, shall be taken into account in determining or calculating the period of service in eligible employment in relation to any person. Eligible unions means the National Union of Mine Workers and the Union of Democratic Mine Workers, and references to eligible union shall be construed accordingly. Employer in relation to any member employed before the transfer date by the principal employer, a subsidiary, a small mine licensee, an associated undertaking or, in respect of a branch secretary only, a recognized trade union means the principal employer or that subsidiary or small mine licensee or associated undertaking or recognized trade union, as the case may be, in relation to any person who before the transfer date is remunerated out of monies provided by deductions from the wages of or contributions by other persons means the person or persons responsible for the payment of wages, other than wages in respect of trade union activities or inspection activities, to such member, in relation to a member engaged in trade union activities means the recognized trade union in activities in respect of which or for the purposes of which he is engaged. In relation to a member engaged in inspection activities means the person or persons, including any body of persons incorporated or unincorporated, responsible for making payments to the member in relation to such inspection activities or for providing the funds from which such payments to the member are made, and in relation to any other member for the time being in eligible employment means that member's employer, but so however that for the purposes of the scheme and the rules there may at the same time be more than one employer in relation to a member. Estimated earnings means in relation to any period of strike absence the notional amount which the pensions officer shall estimate the member would have received as earnings if he had worked normally during the weeks of strike absence in question. Extra service credit means such period of contributing service as awarded under Rule 25. The first transfer date means the date which immediately precedes the first date on which the duty specified in paragraph 3 of Schedule 5 to the 1994 Act arises in accordance with paragraph 3.2 of that schedule. Guarantee date means the date from which arrangements entered into by the guarantor in relation to the scheme under paragraph 2.9 of Schedule 5 to the 1994 Act have effect. Guaranteed crystallized augmentations has the meaning ascribed to the term in Clause 18b, 5.4. Guaranteed fund means the guaranteed fund referred to in Clause 18b. Guaranteed liabilities means the liabilities referred to in subparagraphs a, b, and c of paragraph 4 of Clause 40. Guarantor means the Secretary of State. Guarantor's fund means the guarantor's fund referred to in Clause 18b. Incapacity has the meaning conferred on it by paragraph 11 of the Mine Workers Sick Pay Scheme dated the 20th of March 1970 between the principal employer and the union. Income tax year means any period from the 6th of April in one calendar year to the 5th of April in the next following calendar year inclusive. Index of retail prices has the meaning assigned thereto by Rule 26. Industrial accident in relation to any person means any accident arising out of or in the course of his employment in eligible employment. The Industrial Death and Retirement Scheme means the NCB Industrial Death and Retirement Scheme. Industrial disease in relation to any person means any disease or personal injury prescribed under Section 76 of the Social Security Act or any statutory provisions directly or indirectly replaced by that section in relation to his employment, being a disease or injury due to the nature of his employment in eligible employment. The Industrial Injuries Act means the National Insurance, Industrial Injuries, Act 1965. The Industrial Injuries Deed means the deed dated the 31st of December 1977 and made between George Clifford Shepherd and others of the one part and the principal employer of the other part relating to the termination of the Industrial Injuries Scheme. The Industrial Injuries Scheme means the National Insurance, Industrial Injuries, Colliery Workers Supplementary Scheme set forth in Schedule 1 to the National Insurance, Industrial Injuries, Colliery Workers Supplementary Scheme, Amendment and Consolidation Order 1970. The inland revenue limits means the limitations set out in Rule 9 on the form and the amount of benefit which may not be contravened or exceeded without prejudicing the approval of the scheme by the Board of the Inland Revenue for the purposes of Chapter I of Part 14 of the Income and Corporation Taxes Act 1988. Inspection activities means activities in the course of or for the purposes of a. An inspection carried out by virtue of subsection 2, or 3, of or under such agreement as is mentioned in subsection 4, of Section 123 of the Mines and Quarries Act 1954 by a member who is for the time being I. A member of a panel appointed under subsection 1, of the said section, or 2. An advisor selected to accompany a member of such a panel by virtue of subsection 5, of the said section when such inspection is carried out, or b. An inspection carried out by virtue of the provisions of the schedule to an agreement dated the 6th of March 1978 made between the principal employer, the Union, the National Association of Colliery Overmen Deputies and Shot Firers, and the British Association of Colliery Management. The investment reserve means that notional fund forming part of the pension fund created pursuant to Clause 18a. IWS, MPS means the retirement benefits scheme known as the Industry-Wide Mine Workers Pension Scheme, being a new scheme within the meaning of paragraph 3.1 of Schedule 5 to the 1994 Act, to which a member to whom Rule 28A applies requests that the transfer payment referred to in Rule 28A be made. Local committee means subject to Rule 46.2, a local committee constituted in accordance with the provisions of Clause 33 as it had effect prior to the guarantee date. Maternity pay has the meaning assigned to the expression statutory maternity pay within Section 164 of the Social Security Contributions and Benefits Act 1992. Month means calendar month. The National Insurance Act means the National Insurance Act 1965. Normal contributions means contributions payable by or in respect of a member under Rule 4. Occupational pension scheme means any scheme or arrangement which is comprised in one or more instruments or agreements and which has, or is capable of having, effect in relation to one or more descriptions or categories of employment so as to provide benefits in the form of pensions or otherwise, payable on termination of service, or on death or retirement, to or in respect of earners with service qualifying them therefore in an employment of any such description or category. Payment in relation to trade union activities means any money payment made by a recognized trade union to a member before the transfer date for or in respect of trade union activities or expenses incurred in carrying out trade union activities in respect of or for the purposes of that recognized trade union which is of a type or falls within a category agreed between the principal employer and that recognized trade union, and in relation to inspection activities means any money payment made before the transfer date to a member for or in respect of inspection activities or expenses incurred in carrying out inspection activities which is of a type or falls within a category agreed between the principal employer and any other persons, including any body of persons incorporated or unincorporated, who are the employer in relation to that member for the purposes of inspection activities in which that member is engaged. The pension fund has the meaning assigned thereto by Clause 5. Pensionable age means, with effect on or after the 1st of March 1992, in respect of both a male and female member the age of 60. Pensionable earnings has the meaning assigned thereto by Rule 8. The Pensions Act means the Social Security Pensions Act 1975 and, unless the context otherwise requires, includes a reference to any regulations made under it for the time being in force. Pensions officer means a person appointed by the principal employer, before the guarantee date, or by the Committee of Management, on or after the guarantee date, to administer the scheme. Period of strike absence means any period before the transfer date comprising a number of consecutive weeks of strike absence, when that number exceeds 1 week. Permanently incapable of self-support in relation to any person means that he is, in the opinion of the principal employer's medical advisor, incapable of supporting himself by reason of physical or mental infirmity and likely to remain so incapable for a prolonged period. Principal employer means, according to the context in which it appears, either I, the British Coal Corporation and /or 2, with effect from the date of assumption any other body or bodies corporate which shall be a successor or successors to the whole or a substantial part of the undertaking of the British Coal Corporation and which shall have assumed by deed or statutory authority the obligations of the principal employer under the scheme and rules. The principal employer's medical advisor means any qualified medical practitioner appointed or approved before the guarantee date by the principal employer for the purposes of the scheme or on or after the guarantee date by the Committee of Management, and references to the opinion or certificate of the principal employer's medical advisor shall be construed as references to such opinion or certificate or, as the case may be, to the determination of an independent medical consultant given under Rule 48. The principal employer's records means the records of contributing members of trade unions, including the eligible unions, employed before the guarantee date by the principal employer and subsidiaries which are held by the principal employer and subsidiaries and prepared on the basis of instructions given by the relevant employees, being records such that any employee is entitled from time to time to require that he be informed of the eligible union, if any, to which he is attributed as a member, and if he so thinks fit by written notice to require an attribution to be changed, removed or made. Qualifying service has the meaning assigned thereto by Rule 7. Recognized insurance company means an insurance company which is authorized by the competent authority of a member state of the European Communities under either Article 6 or Article 27 of Council Directive 79/267/EEC. Recognized trade union means a trade union in relation to which before the closure date an agreement in writing for the time being subsists between the principal employer and that trade union to the effect that that trade union should be a recognized trade union for all the purposes of the scheme and the rules. Relative means a lawful widow or widower, a child as defined in this paragraph, a lineal descendant or ascendant in a direct line not being a child as defined in this paragraph, stepfather, stepmother, brother, sister, half-brother, half-sister, stepbrother or stepsister, and any person who is such a relative in consequence of legal adoption or would have been such a relative if some person born illegitimate had been born legitimate. Relevant members means before the closure date contributing members of an eligible union who are in eligible employment and are members of the scheme. Relevant time means, in the case of employees paid weekly, the end of the last period of 7 days by reference to which an employee's remuneration is normally calculated, in which all weekdays, Mondays to Fridays inclusive, fall in October or, in the case of other employees, the end of October in any year. Retirement has the meaning assigned thereto by paragraph 1 of Rule 2. The rules, subject to the provisions of paragraph 3 of this clause, means the rules annexed hereto, and unless the subject or the context otherwise requires references to the rules shall include references to the scheme and the schedules to the rules. Rules Amendment Committee means the Rules Amendment Committee constituted under Clause 38. The scheme, subject to the provisions of paragraph 3 of this clause, means this scheme, and unless the subject or the context otherwise requires references to the scheme shall include references to the rules and the schedules to the rules. Scholarship period has the meaning assigned thereto by Rule 4. The secretary means, a. Before the guarantee date, the joint secretaries or the surviving or continuing joint secretary or joint secretaries of the Committee of Management and the Rules Amendment Committee, and includes any person nominated by the Committee of Management to perform any of the duties of such joint secretaries, and b. From the guarantee date, the secretary appointed under Clause 36b. The Secretary of State means the Secretary of State for Trade and Industry. Small mine licensee means any individual working coal by virtue of the grant of a gale in the Forest of Dean or in any other part of the Hundred of St. Briavels, and any person or body of persons for the time being engaged in coal mining activities by virtue of a license granted by the principal employer under Section 36, 2a, of the Coal Industry Nationalisation Act 1946, who for the time being is bound by the provisions of the scheme in relation to persons employed by him. The Social Security Act means the Social Security Act 1975. The Social Security legislation means the Social Security Act and the Industrial Injuries and Diseases, Old Cases, Act 1975, and all provisions of any Acts of Parliament consolidated by those Acts, including any provisions of such Acts remaining or deemed to remain in force for any purpose, and the Social Security, Consequential Provisions, Act 1975, and also any regulations made or taking effect under any of the above-mentioned acts or provisions for the time being in force or deemed to be in force. Special dependent has the meaning assigned thereto by Part 3 of the 4th Schedule. The Staff Scheme means the British Coal Corporation Staff Superannuation Scheme established by a resolution of the principal employer dated the 31st of December 1946. Standard contributions means contributions payable by an employer by virtue of paragraph 1 of clause 2. State pensionable age means the age of 65 in the case of a man and the age of 60 in the case of a woman, or in either case such other age as legislation may determine as state pensionable age. Subsidiary means any company which for the time being is a subsidiary within the meaning of Section 736 of the Companies Act 1985 of the principal employer. Supplementary fatal injury benefit means a pension or allowance under Article 4, 1, C, D, or E, of the Industrial Injuries Scheme, or under Clause 5, 1, or 3, of the Industrial Death and Retirement Scheme. Termination date has the meaning given to the term in paragraph 3 of clause 40. Trade union means an organization, whether permanent or temporary, which either a. consists wholly or mainly of workers of one or more descriptions and is an organization whose principal purposes include the regulation of relations between workers of that description or those descriptions and employers or employers' associations, as defined in Section 28. 2, of the Trade Union and Labor Relations Act 1974, or b. consists wholly or mainly of I. constituent or affiliated organizations which fulfill the conditions specified in paragraph a above, or themselves consist wholly or mainly of constituent or affiliated organizations which fulfill those conditions, or 2. representatives or such constituent or affiliated organizations. And in either case is an organization whose principal purposes include the regulation of relations between workers and employers or between workers and employers' associations, defined as aforesaid, or include the regulation of relations between its constituent or affiliated organizations. Trade union activities means activities before the transfer date by a member, other than a branch secretary, in respect of or for the purposes of a recognized trade union. Transfer date means a. in relation to a member paying normal contributions, other than a branch secretary or an employee of a small mine licensee, such date after the guarantee date as immediately precedes the day on which either I. the employment of the member is transferred to another employer which is not an employer, or 2. the employer of the member ceases to be a subsidiary of the principal employer. b. in relation to a member who is an employee of a small mine licensee or is a branch secretary, the first transfer date. Transfer payment in relation to any person means a payment made by one occupational pension scheme to another occupational pension scheme or a personal pension scheme, as defined in Section 1 of the Pension Schemes Act 1993, as a result of which accrued rights of that person under the former occupational pension scheme, which may include rights accrued by virtue of any transfer payment, are transferred to, and allowed to that person under, the latter occupational pension scheme, or personal pension scheme in accordance with the terms on which the transfer payment is made and accepted. The trustee subject to the provisions of Clause 5 shall from the guarantee date mean Mine Workers Pension Scheme Trustees Limited or other the trustee or trustees from time to time of the scheme as may be appointed under Clause 5am of the scheme. The union means the National Union of Mine Workers. Week for the purpose of determining a person's contributions, credits or earnings, and for the purpose of the definition of week of strike absence means the period of 7 days by reference to which that person's wages are normally calculated. Week of strike absence means any week in a person's period of eligible employment during the whole of which a person is absent from work during his normal working hours due to strike action by him, or is absent from work or unable to work during his normal working hours by reason of strike action by any other member or members of the trade union to which he belongs. Without prejudice to the generality of the foregoing, a person shall be deemed to be absent from work due to strike action by him during any period in which any other member or members of that trade union are taking part in strike action affecting his normal place of work if he is absent from work without prior authorization by the employer at a time when he is not prevented from working by incapacity. Wholly owned subsidiary in relation to the principal employer means a company the entire beneficial interest in all shares of which is held by one or more of the principal employer and other wholly owned subsidiaries of the principal employer. Widow, except for the purposes of Rule 9am, means a. in relation to a man his lawful widow, and b. in relation to a woman who dies on or before the 5th of April, 1988 her lawful widower, being a widower who, in the opinion of the principal employer's medical advisor, is by reason of any infirmity permanently incapable of self-support and who was a dependent in relation to such woman, and c. in relation to a woman who dies on or after the 6th of April, 1988 her lawful widower, but so that for the purposes of entitlement to any pension under the rules any such widow or widower, as is specified in paragraphs A and B above, shall cease to be a widow within this definition if she or he remarried before the 1st of January, 1979. The 1994 amendment date means the 30th of September, 1994. 3. Unless the subject or the context otherwise requires, references to any act, regulations, agreement, scheme, rules or schedule or any provision thereof shall be construed as references to the same as amended or reenacted from time to time or, as the case may be, to any act, regulations, agreement, scheme, rules or schedule or any provision thereof repeating or revoking and replacing the same. 5. In the construction of references to the age of any person, that person shall be deemed to have attained that age if he survives until midnight of the day preceding the anniversary of his birth on which he will have lived for the number of years being the number specified. 6. Unless the subject or the context otherwise requires, words in the singular include the plural and words in the plural include the singular and words importing the masculine gender include the feminine. The headings to the scheme, the rules and the schedules to the rules are intended for convenience of reference only and are not to be deemed to be or construed as part of the scheme. The rules. I. Membership and termination of employment and service. Eligibility. 1.1. On and after the 6th of April, 1975 and before the transfer date the following persons shall, if they are under pensionable age, be eligible to become members of the scheme. That is to say, a. Every person who is employed by the principal employer or with effect from the 1st of October, 1977 a subsidiary, otherwise than in a grade eligible for the staff scheme, not being a person who is contributing to the staff scheme. b. Every person who is employed by a small mine licensee, being a person employed in coal industry activities who is not in a grade in which, if he were employed by the principal employer he would be eligible for the staff scheme, and c. Every person who is employed as a branch secretary. 2. For the purposes of paragraph 1 of this rule, a. Employed in relation to any person means employed in regular whole-time employment, including employment which would have been regular whole-time employment had that person not been engaged in trade union activities or inspection activities or both, and b. Coal industry activities has the meaning assigned thereto by Section 63 of the Coal Industry Nationalisation Act 1946. 3. Notwithstanding the foregoing provisions of this rule, if a member shall cease to be eligible for membership in accordance with the provisions of paragraph 1 of this rule by reason of his becoming an employee of an employer which is not or has ceased to be an employer as defined in clause 41, 2, as a consequence of the sale of the business in which or the company by which he is employed, he may, subject to compliance with the provisions of clause 4, 1, and with the consent of the principal employer, which may be given subject to such conditions as the principal employer imposes, and of his employer continue to be a member of the scheme as the Inland Revenue may approve. 3. Notwithstanding the foregoing provisions of this rule, if a member ceases to be eligible for membership in accordance with the provisions of paragraph 1 of this rule by reason of his becoming an employee of an employer which is not or has ceased to be an employer as defined in clause 41, 2, as a consequence of a sale of the business in which or the company by which he is employed, with effect from the guarantee date the Committee of Management with the consent of the guarantor may at its discretion direct, that the employer of such contributing member and the contributing member may participate or continue to participate in the scheme until the first transfer date provided such participation does not prejudice continued approval of the scheme by the Board of Inland Revenue for the purposes of Chapter 1 of Part 14 of the Income and Corporation Taxes Act 1988. 4. With effect from the guarantee date until the closure date the provisions of this rule shall continue to have effect but no person shall become eligible to become a member of the scheme after the guarantee date without the consent of the guarantor. 5. No person shall become eligible to become a member of the scheme after the closure date. Ceasing normal contributions. 1. A member who, while remaining in eligible employment, wishes to cease to pay normal contributions in accordance with the provisions of Rule 4, shall give written notice to the pensions officer. On the giving of such notice his service in eligible employment and contributing service shall be deemed to terminate pursuant to the provisions of Rule 9b with effect from such date as normal contributions to the scheme cease to be deducted from his earnings. 2. A person who has given written notice pursuant to paragraph 1 of this rule and who has ceased to pay normal contributions as required by Rule 4, may before the transfer date be permitted to recommence payment of normal contributions from such date and on such terms and subject to such conditions as the Committee of Management, in their absolute discretion, may think fit. Retirement and termination of employment and service. 2.1a. Where for the purposes of the rules reference is made to a member's retirement from eligible employment, such retirement shall be deemed to take effect on the termination otherwise than by reason of death of his service in eligible employment, and retire shall be construed accordingly. b. The service in eligible employment of a member who would but for this subparagraph be treated as remaining in eligible employment on or after the 6th of April 1975 and after the expiration of a period of 5 years after he attains pensionable age shall for all the purposes of the rules be deemed to terminate, and he shall for those purposes be deemed to retire from eligible employment, upon that date or the expiration of that period, whichever is the later. c. Where for the purposes of the rules reference is made to a member's service in eligible employment terminating on or after the 1st of April 1990, such reference shall be deemed to include a member whose service in eligible employment actually terminated prior to such date but which would have terminated after such date if the member had been given the full period of notice of termination to which he was entitled under his contract of employment. d. A member who on the day immediately before the transfer date has attained pensionable age but is continuing in eligible employment shall be deemed to retire from eligible employment on that day. 2. for the purposes of awarding or determining the amount of benefits on or subsequent to retirement or termination of service in eligible employment under the rules in relation to any person, and for the purposes of determining whether a person's service in eligible employment or employment by an associated undertaking or contributing service is continuous or comprises consecutive periods within the meaning of the rules. That person's service in eligible employment shall be deemed not to have terminated, and his service in eligible employment or employment by an associated undertaking or contributing service, as the case may be, shall be deemed to have been continuous and to have comprised consecutive periods if a. Notwithstanding that such service has ceased, I. Before the transfer date he re-enters eligible employment or employment by an associated undertaking, or his contributing service recommences, as the case may be, within not more than 1 month after such cessation or pursuant to the exercise of a right to return to work under Section 48, 1, of the Employment Protection Act 1975, or 2. Such cessation takes place on or after the 6th of April, 1978, and within not more than 6 months, or such longer period as the Secretary of State allows in a particular case under Regulation 10(3)(a) 2, of the Occupational Pension Schemes, Contracting Out, Regulations 1975, and before attaining pensionable age and before the transfer date he re-enters eligible employment or employment by an associated undertaking, or his contributing service recommences, as the case may be, and either no contributions equivalent premium has been paid in respect of him in connection with such cessation, or any contributions equivalent premium so paid is refunded, or b. Such service has ceased on the commencement of a scholarship period in relation to him, and he re-enters eligible employment or employment by an associated undertaking, or his contributing service recommences, as the case may be, within not more than 1 month after the termination of such scholarship period and before the transfer date, or c. Notwithstanding that a person's period of contributing service ceases by reason of any period of strike absence, and his contributing service recommences more than 6 months later and immediately after any such period of strike absence and before the transfer date, provided that in the case of any period of strike absence after February 1984 and before the 1st of January 1987 he makes an election under Rule 3. Provided that no period between such cessation and such re-entry or recommencement shall be taken into account as a period of eligible employment or employment by an associated undertaking or contributing service, as the case may be by virtue of this paragraph. 3. A person who on or after the 6th of April, 1975 and before the transfer date enters eligible employment, being employment by an associated undertaking other than a wholly owned subsidiary of the principal employer, unless he was within not more than 1 month immediately before the date of such entry employed by a. Another associated undertaking other than a wholly owned subsidiary of the principal employer, into the employment of which he entered on or after the 6th of April, 1975, and during which employment he did not exercise the option provided for in this paragraph, or b. Another associated undertaking by whom he was continuously employed since before the 6th of April, 1975. May terminate his obligation to pay contributions under the rules with effect from the date of his entering the employment of the first mentioned associated undertaking, if within 1 month he exercised in writing an option to do so and the principal employer and that associated undertaking agree to his doing so. Upon the exercise of such option, that person's employment in eligible employment and contributing service shall, for the purposes of the rules and subject to the provisions of paragraph 2 of this rule, be deemed to have terminated upon the date of his entering the employment of the first mentioned associated undertaking. 2. Contributions. 3.1. Any person in eligible employment may elect to pay special contributions in respect of any period of strike absence in accordance with the following provisions of this rule. 2. in respect of a period of strike absence commencing on or after the 1st of January 1987, the pensions officer shall determine the total amount of such special contributions by reference to such person's estimated earnings and the normal contributions he would have paid pursuant to Rule 4 if his estimated earnings had been earnings. He shall further determine the weekly amounts of special contributions and the number of weeks over which such weekly amounts shall be payable. Such determinations shall be notified to such person. 3. Within 4 weeks of such notification and before the transfer date, such person may elect to pay such special contributions by notifying the pensions officer in writing. Upon the making of such an election, he shall pay to the scheme, subject to paragraphs 8 and 9 of this rule, the weekly amounts of special contributions over the number of weeks determined by the pensions officer under paragraph 2 of this rule. 5. When any such person shall make an election in accordance with paragraph 3 of this rule, then notwithstanding any other provisions of the scheme and rules. A. Subject to paragraph 9 of this rule, such period of strike absence shall be deemed to be included in his total period of contributing service, and b. Such estimated earnings shall be deemed to be his earnings during the period of strike absence. 7. For the purpose of determining the employer's obligation to pay standard contributions under Clause 2, the amount of special contributions in accordance with this rule shall not be treated as contributions payable under the rules by or in respect of the members or persons concerned, provided that 2. The principal employer shall not be required to make payments under this paragraph in respect of a period of strike absence commencing prior to the 28th of October, 2000. 3. No employer other than the principal employer shall be required to make payments under this paragraph in respect of a period of strike absence commencing prior to the 27th of October, 2001, and 4. An employer shall pay to the scheme amounts which bear the same proportion to such special contributions and weekly amounts as the members' normal contributions payable under paragraph 1 of the Rule 4 bear to the standard contributions payable by an employer under paragraph 1 of Clause 2. Such amounts shall be paid by the employer at the times the special contributions are paid, and the weekly amounts deducted or at the employer's option may be paid in capitalized amounts at such times, over such periods and in such manner as may be agreed with the actuary. 8. Where any person is making payments of weekly amounts of special contributions under subparagraph 3 of this rule when his service in eligible employment terminates, otherwise than by reason of the transfer date having arrived, or he dies, the pensions officer shall on the advice of the actuary determine the total amount of the special contributions remaining unpaid to the scheme at the date of such termination or death. This amount shall be deducted from any payment of lump sum benefit or transfer payment to or in respect of that person under the rules. 9. Where any person is making payment of weekly amounts of special contributions under subparagraph 3 of this rule when his service in eligible employment terminates by reason of the transfer date having arrived, the payments shall cease and the pensions officer shall on the advice of the actuary determine the extent to which the period of strike absence is to be deemed to be included in his total period of contributing service. Normal contributions. 4.1. Subject to the provisions of paragraph 1 of Rule 1am, every member shall pay contributions, in the rules called normal contributions, at the rate of 5.1/4% of the amount of the member's earnings in respect of any period during which he is in eligible employment, and made to him not earlier than the 1st of January 1979 and not later than whichever is the earliest of the week in which his period of contributing service totals 40 complete years, or the week in which he attains pensionable age or the transfer date. 2. If after entering eligible employment any person is not engaged in work in the course of such employment during the period of any scholarship approved by the principal employer for the purposes of this paragraph, in the rules called a scholarship period, normal contributions shall be paid in respect of him by the principal employer at the rate specified in paragraph 1 of this rule in relation to any part of such scholarship period which begins not earlier than the week including 6th April 1975 and ends with the week in which he attains pensionable age. Additional voluntary contributions. 5.1. This rule sets out the terms of additional voluntary contributions. 5.1. This rule sets out the terms upon which a member may elect to make additional voluntary contributions to the AVC scheme in order to secure additional benefits. 2. In this rule, A. AVC scheme means the scheme embodied in this rule for the provision of certain additional benefits. B. The AVC interest shall mean in relation to a member contributing to the AVC scheme his interest in the AVC scheme in respect of his contributions to the AVC scheme as determined by the Committee of Management where appropriate on such advice as they think fit. 3. No member may elect in accordance with paragraph 4 of this rule if he is then subject to notice to terminate his employment. 4a. Subject to paragraph 3 of this rule a member may elect to pay additional voluntary contributions at any time prior to pensionable age and prior to the transfer date. B. In no circumstances shall any additional voluntary contributions be of such an amount that they would, when aggregated with any normal or any special contributions payable under Rule 3, in any year exceed 15%, or such higher percentage as the Commissioners of Inland Revenue may in a particular case prescribe, of his total remuneration from the employer for that year. C. Contributions will be deducted from the earnings becoming payable to a member. D. A member may, on giving reasonable notice not exceeding 12 months to the Pensions Officer, reduce, increase or terminate his additional voluntary contributions provided that a reduction in his additional voluntary contributions must not result in the payment of contributions of less than such amount as the Committee of Management may from time to time determine, having regard to paragraph 8 of Regulation 2 of the Pension Schemes, Voluntary Contributions Requirements and Voluntary and Compulsory Membership, Regulations 1987. 5. Additional voluntary contributions shall be payable promptly in such manner, consistent with Inland Revenue approval, as the member and the employer shall agree, and shall be applied by the Committee of Management to provide additional benefits in respect of the member in such form as the member shall, with the consent of the Committee of Management, determine, provided that no part of the additional benefit shall take the form of a cash payment payable to the member during his lifetime. Such additional benefits must be reasonable, having regard to the amount of the additional voluntary contributions and to the value of the other benefits under the scheme. 6. On the death of a member who has paid additional voluntary contributions pursuant to this rule before, his AVC interest shall be applied pursuant to paragraph 7 of this rule. The member's AVC interest shall be held by the Committee of Management upon trust, with power to pay or apply the same within 2 years from the date of the member's death to or for the benefit of, or by way of settlement or otherwise to trustees for the benefit of, such one or more of the member's dependents or relatives in such shares and proportions, if more than one, upon such trusts and in such manner, including the provision of annuities, as the Committee of Management shall in their discretion think fit. Any part of the AVC interest not so paid or applied within such period of 2 years shall be paid to the legal personal representatives of the member, except that if the member's AVC interest would vest in the Crown as bono vacantiae, the Committee of Management shall hold such AVC interest under the trusts of the scheme to apply the same to such of the purposes thereof as they shall decide. The Committee of Management may, but without being in any way bound to do so, have regard to any document signed by the member concerned expressing his wishes relating to the disposal of his AVC interest. 7. On a member becoming entitled to benefit under Rule 10, whether or not increased under Rule 11, Rule 12, Rule 13, Rule 14, Rule 14a, Rule 14b or Rule 15, his AVC interest shall be applied by the Committee of Management in accordance with the wishes of the member expressed to the Committee of Management in writing, provided that a. If the member has not expressed any wishes in writing to the Committee of Management, they shall be entitled to apply the AVC interest in providing such benefits within the Inland Revenue limits for the member, his dependents or relatives as the Committee of Management in their absolute discretion shall think appropriate. b. If the wishes of the member expressed pursuant to this paragraph would result in any of the benefits for which the member has elected exceeding the inland revenue limits, then the surplus of the money in the AVC interest shall be applied by the Committee of Management at their discretion in providing such other benefits within the inland revenue limits for his dependents or relatives as the Committee of Management in their absolute discretion shall deem appropriate, and if the Committee of Management have provided the maximum benefits to or in respect of a member which they may provide under the inland revenue limits, then any remaining surplus of the money in the AVC interest shall be paid in accordance with the provisions of paragraphs 33 and 34 of Schedule 6 to the Finance Act 1989. 8. Any benefit provided pursuant to paragraph 7 of this rule shall be secured by the Committee of Management by contracts or policies taken out in the United Kingdom with a recognized insurance company. 9. On a member ceasing to be in eligible employment before attaining pensionable age without becoming entitled to an immediate pension, then a. The additional voluntary contributions payable by such member shall cease forthwith. b. If the member to whom this paragraph applies takes a refund of his normal contributions, his AVC interest shall be returned to him subject to deduction of tax pursuant to Rule 43. c. If a transfer is made to another retirement benefits fund, scheme or arrangement in respect of part or all of a member's benefit under the scheme, a like transfer shall be made in respect of the AVC interest, and d. Subject to the preceding provisions, the AVC interest shall be applied in providing benefits in accordance with paragraph 7 of this rule at pensionable age or such earlier date on which any benefits under Rule 12, Rule 13, Rule 14, Rule 14A or Rule 14B commence to be payable. Payment of contributions. 6.1. The amount of any normal contributions payable by a member under Rule 4 shall be deducted from any payment of earnings made to that member. 2. In assessing the amount of any normal contributions payable in relation to any week, any half or greater fraction of a new penny shall be treated as a whole new penny, and any smaller fraction of a new penny shall be ignored. 3. Benefits. Qualifying service. 7.1. Subject as hereinafter provided, whereunder the rules provision is made for benefits to be awarded by reference to qualifying service, such service shall be credited to a person as follows. a. For any service by him in eligible employment on or after the 6th of April, 1975 and before whichever is the earlier of the transfer date and the date on which he attains pensionable age, excluding, except on the termination of that period of service, any period of service in respect of which a contributions equivalent premium has been paid and has not been refunded, or in respect of which a refund of contributions is subject to subparagraph c of paragraph 5 of Rule 15, paid or payable to him. Under subparagraph b I of that paragraph, or both, he shall be credited with qualifying service equal to the length of such service in eligible employment, provided that in respect of any period of service in eligible employment on or after the 6th of April, 1988, he shall not be credited with qualifying service if he has given written notice pursuant to paragraph 1 of Rule 1 AM and normal contributions have ceased to be deducted from his earnings. b. For any service by him in eligible employment during the period beginning on the 3rd of April, 1961 and ending on the 5th of April, 1975, he shall be credited with qualifying service equal to the length of that service calculated in accordance with Rule 9 of the rules as they had effect immediately before the 6th of April, 1975. c. For any service by him in eligible employment during the period beginning on the 3rd of April, 1961 and ending on the 5th of April, 1975, in respect of which a payment in lieu of contributions has been made in pursuance of the National Insurance Act or any statutory provisions directly or indirectly replaced by it, he shall, for the purposes of entitlement to benefit by virtue of I. Retirement from or termination of service in eligible employment before the 6th of April, 1978, or 2. Retirement from or termination of service in eligible employment on or after the 6th of April, 1978 on the termination of a continuous period of such service commencing before that date. But, subject to paragraph 4 of Rule 23 and subparagraph E2 of paragraph 3 of Rule 27, not further or otherwise, be credited with qualifying service equal to the length of such service by reference to which such payment was calculated. D. For any service by him in eligible employment during the period beginning on the 3rd of April, 1961 and ending on the 5th of April, 1975 in respect of which that person is entitled to a pension under the rules, he shall be credited with qualifying service equal to the length of such service by reference to which such pension was calculated. E. For every 78 units with which he is credited in respect of service before the 3rd of April, 1961 other than past service within the meaning assigned to that term by Clause 42 of the scheme as it had effect immediately before the 3rd of April, 1961 he shall be credited with 1 year's qualifying service, and for any units not thus taken into account he shall be credited with a fraction of a year's qualifying service equal to the fraction which the number of units not thus taken into account bears to 78. F. For any back service credit, within the meaning of Clause 42 of the scheme as it had effect before the 3rd of April, 1961, with which he is credited he shall be credited with the number of years qualifying service which is equal to the number of years of past service, within the meaning of Clause 42 of the scheme as it had effect before the 3rd of April, 1961, shown in the case of a man in the second schedule to the rules as they had effect before the 3rd of April, 1961 or in the case of a woman in the third schedule. Thereto opposite the number of units comprised in the back service credit. G. Where a transfer payment is made to the scheme from another occupational pension scheme in respect of the person under Rule 28 he shall be credited in accordance with the terms referred to in paragraph 2 of that rule with any period of qualifying service provided for by those terms. 2. Where the total of the qualifying service to be credited to a person in accordance with paragraph 1 of this rule includes a fraction of a year, the said fraction, if it is equal to 1/2 or more, shall be deemed to be a complete year, and if it is less than 1/2 shall be ignored. 3. For the purposes of paragraph 2 of this rule a year shall be deemed to consist of exactly 52 weeks. Pensionable earnings. 8.1. Subject as hereinafter provided, for the purpose pensionable earnings. 8.1. Subject as hereinafter provided, for the purpose of the rules pensionable earnings in relation to any person means a. The amount of that person's average total weekly earnings during a period of 3 consecutive years falling within the final continuous period not exceeding 13 consecutive years of his contributing service, such period of 3 consecutive years being the period during which the amount of his average total weekly earnings equals or exceeds the amount of his average total weekly earnings during any other period of 3 consecutive years during such final continuous period, or b. If that person's total final continuous period of contributing service comprises less than 3 consecutive years, the amount of his average total weekly earnings during such final continuous period. 2. Any amount of earnings of any person taken into account for the purpose of calculating that person's pensionable earnings shall be adjusted by reference to changes in the index of retail prices if and insofar as is provided by Rule 26. 3. For the purposes of this rule year means income tax year. Provided that if, in respect of a year commenced on or after the 6th of April, 1993, a person's pensionable earnings for the purposes of paragraph 1 of this rule would be increased by taking into account his total weekly earnings during the period commenced on the 6th of April preceding that date of termination of his service in eligible employment and expiring on that date, that period shall be deemed to be a year for the purposes of this rule. Inland revenue limits. 9.1. Notwithstanding anything to the contrary in the provisions of the scheme, the benefits payable to a member or to any person in respect of him shall not, when aggregated with all benefits of a like nature provided under all relevant schemes providing benefits in respect of relevant service, exceed the limits set out in the following paragraphs of this rule or such greater limits as the Board of Inland Revenue may in writing from time to time agree. 2. The member's aggregate retirement benefit shall not exceed a. In respect of a pre-1987 member or a 1987 member. I. On retirement at or before pensionable age, except before pensionable age on grounds of ill health under Rule 12, a pension of 1/60th of final remuneration for each year of relevant service, not exceeding 40 years, or such greater amount as will not prejudice approval. 2. On retirement on grounds of ill health under Rule 12, the amount calculated in accordance with subparagraph a.I. of this paragraph as if the member had remained in relevant service until pensionable age, final remuneration being computed as at the actual date of retirement. 3. On retirement after pensionable age, a pension of the greatest of I. The amount calculated in accordance with subparagraph a.I. of this paragraph on the basis that the actual date of retirement was the member's pensionable age. 2. The amount which could have been provided at pensionable age in accordance with subparagraph a.I. of this paragraph increased either actuarially in respect of the period of deferment or in proportion to any increase in the index during that period, and 3. Where the member's total relevant service has exceeded 40 years, the aggregate of 1/60th of final remuneration for each year of relevant service before pensionable age, not exceeding 40 such years, and of a further 1/60th of final remuneration for each year of relevant service after pensionable age, with an overall maximum of 45 reckonable years. Final remuneration being computed in respect of I, and 3, as at the actual date of retirement, or 4. On ceasing to be in eligible employment before pensionable age, a pension of 1/60th of final remuneration for each year of relevant service up to the date of such cessation, not exceeding 40 years, or such greater amount as will not prejudice approval. The amount computed as aforesaid may be increased at the rate of 5% compound for each complete year or, if greater, in proportion to any increase in the index which has occurred between the date of such cessation and the date on which the pension begins to be payable, and may be further increased so as to comply with the requirements of the Department of Social Security. B. In respect of a new tax regime member or a 1989 member. I. On retirement at any time between attaining age 50 and attaining age 75, except before pensionable age on grounds of ill health under Rule 22, a pension of 1/60th of final remuneration for each year of relevant service, not exceeding 40 years, or such greater amount as will not prejudice approval. 2. On retirement at any time before pensionable age on grounds of ill health under Rule 12 am pension of the amount which could have been provided at pensionable age in accordance with subparagraph b.I. of this paragraph, final remuneration being computed as at the actual date of retirement, or 3. On ceasing to be in eligible employment before attaining age 75, a pension of 1/60th of final remuneration for each year of relevant service up to the date of such cessation, not exceeding 40 years, or such greater amount as will not prejudice approval. The amount computed as aforesaid may be increased at the rate of 5% compound for each complete year or, if greater, in proportion to any increase in the index which has occurred between the date the member ceased to be in eligible employment and the date on which the pension begins to be payable, and may be further increased so as to comply with the requirements of the Department of Social Security. 4. Benefits for a new tax regime member or a 1989 member are further restricted to ensure that his total retirement benefit from the scheme and from any associated scheme or connected scheme does not exceed a pension of 1/30th of the permitted maximum for each year of relevant service, subject to a maximum of 20/30ths. V. For the purpose of calculating the aggregate retirement benefit or the total retirement benefit in subparagraphs b, I, 2, 4, above, the pension equivalent of any lump sum retirement benefit is 1/12th of its total cash value. 3. The member's lump sum retirement benefit shall not exceed a. In respect of a pre-1987 member or a 1987 member. I. On retirement at or before pensionable age, except before pensionable age on grounds of ill health under Rule 12, 3/80ths of final remuneration for each year of relevant service, not exceeding 40 years, or such greater amount as will not prejudice approval. 2. On retirement on the grounds of ill health under Rule 12, the amount calculated in accordance with subparagraph a, I, of this paragraph as if the member had remained in relevant service until pensionable age, final remuneration being computed as at the actual date of retirement. 3. On retirement after pensionable age, the greatest of I, the amount calculated in accordance with subparagraph a, I, of this paragraph on the basis that the actual date of retirement was the member's pensionable age. 2. The amount which could have been provided at pensionable age in accordance with subparagraph a, I, of this paragraph together with an amount representing interest thereon, and 3. Where the member's total relevant service has exceeded 40 years, the aggregate of 3/80ths of final remuneration for each year of relevant service before pensionable age, not exceeding 40 such years, and of a further 3/80ths of final remuneration for each year of relevant service after pensionable age, with an overall maximum of 45 reckonable years. Final remuneration being computed in respect of I, and 3, as at the actual date of retirement, or 4. On ceasing to be in eligible employment before pensionable age, a lump sum of 3/80ths of final remuneration for each year of relevant service prior to such cessation, not exceeding 40 years, or such greater amount as will not prejudice approval. The amount computed as aforesaid may be increased in proportion to any increase in the index which has occurred between the date the member ceased to be in eligible employment and the date on which the benefit is first paid, but only if and to the same extent as the total benefits have been increased under subparagraph b, 3, of paragraph 2. b. In respect of a new tax regime member or a 1989 member. I. On retirement at any time between attaining age 50 and attaining age 75, except before pensionable age on grounds of ill health under Rule 22, 3/80ths of final remuneration for each year of relevant service, not exceeding 40 years, or such greater amount as will not prejudice approval. 2. On retirement at any time before pensionable age on grounds of ill health under Rule 12, the amount which could have been provided at pensionable age in accordance with subparagraph b, I, of this paragraph, final remuneration being computed as at the actual date of retirement. 3. On ceasing to be in eligible employment before attaining age 75, a lump sum of 3/80ths of final remuneration for each year of relevant service prior to such cessation, not exceeding 40 years, or such greater amount as will not prejudice approval. The amount computed as aforesaid may be increased in proportion to any increase in the index which has occurred between the date the member ceased to be in eligible employment and the date on which the benefit is first paid. 4. The lump sum benefit, exclusive of any refund of the member's own contributions and any interest thereon, payable on the death of a member while in relevant service or, having left relevant service with a deferred pension, before the commencement of his pension, shall not, when aggregated with all like benefits under associated schemes, exceed the greater of I. £5,000, and 2. 4 times the greater of the annual rate of the member's remuneration at the date of death and his final remuneration. 5. Any pension for a dependent, excluding any pension resulting from relevant service by that dependent, when aggregated with the pensions payable to that dependent under all associated schemes, shall not exceed an amount equal to 2/3 RDS of the aggregate retirement benefit. A. Being paid to the member at the date of his death, including any pension increases given under the rules, or b. Being a deferred benefit payable to the member at pensionable age in the case of a pre-1987 member or a 1987 member, or between attaining age 50 and attaining age 75 in the case of a new tax regime member or a 1989 member, including any pension increases given under the rules, or c. Prospectively payable to the member who dies in relevant service had he remained in relevant service up to pensionable age at the rate of pay in force immediately before his death, or d. Prospectively payable to the member who dies in relevant service after pensionable age on the basis that he had retired on the day before he died, or such greater amount as will not prejudice approval. If such pensions are payable to more than one person in respect of a member, the aggregate of all such pensions payable in respect of him under this and all associated schemes shall not exceed the full amount of whichever is the appropriate aggregate retirement benefit under subparagraph A, B, C, or D, above, or such greater sum as will not prejudice approval. 6. In calculating any benefits under the scheme, deductions shall be made in respect of any retained benefits to such extent as the Board of Inland Revenue may from time to time require. 7. The maximum amount of a pension ascertained in accordance with this rule less any pension which has been commuted for a cash sum or the pension equivalent of any benefits in lump sum form, and any pension surrendered to provide a dependent's pension may be increased at the rate of 3% compound for each complete year, or such higher percentage as the Department of Social Security may from time to time prescribe by regulations, or, if greater, in proportion to the increase in the index, since the pension commenced to be paid. 8. The preceding provisions of this rule shall be modified in their application to a member who is a special director or is or has been a controlling director as follows. A. The amount of the maximum aggregate retirement benefit in paragraph 2, and of the maximum lump sum retirement benefit in paragraph 3, shall be reduced, where necessary, to ensure that approval will not be prejudiced thereby, so as to take account of any corresponding benefits under either a retirement annuity contract or trust scheme approved under Chapter 3 of Part 14 of the 1988 Act, or a personal pension scheme approved under Chapter 4 of Part 14 of the 1988 Act, and b. In relation to a member who is a special director at his pensionable age, where retirement takes place after pensionable age but not later than the member's 70th birthday, subparagraphs A, 3, 2, and 3, of paragraph 2, and subparagraphs A, 3, 2, and 3, of paragraph 3, shall not apply. If the retirement is later than the attainment of that age, the said subparagraphs shall apply as if the member's 70th birthday had been specified in the rules as his pensionable age, so as not to treat as service after pensionable age any service before the member reaches the age of 70. 9. The total contributions paid by a member in a year of assessment to the scheme and any relevant scheme providing benefits by virtue of relevant service shall not exceed 15% of the member's remuneration for that year in respect of that relevant service. 10. A member may elect to become a new tax regime member at any time prior to the date on which benefits commence, are bought out or otherwise transferred from the scheme, or the attainment of age 75, whichever first occurs, by serving written notice on the committee in such form as they shall from time to time prescribe. 11. In this rule the following terms shall have the following meanings. A. The 1988 Act means the Income and Corporation Taxes Act 1988. B. Aggregate retirement benefit means the aggregate of I. The member's pension under the scheme and any associated scheme, and 2. The pension equivalent of the member's lump sum retirement benefit. C. Approval means approval of the scheme by the Board of Inland Revenue under Chapter I of Part 14 of the 1988 Act. D. Associated employer means an employer which is associated with another employer either by being controlled by that other or by both employers being controlled by a third party. Control has the meaning in Section 840 of the 1988 Act. E. Associated schemes means any relevant scheme providing benefits in respect of relevant service or in respect of a 1989 member or new tax regime member. Any relevant scheme which is a connected scheme or which provides benefits in respect of relevant service. F. Connected scheme means any relevant scheme which is connected with the scheme in relation to the member. For this purpose a relevant scheme is connected with the scheme if I. There is a period during which the member has been the employee of two associated employers. 2. That period counts under both schemes as a period in respect of which benefits are payable, and 3. The period counts under one scheme for service with one employer and under the other for service with the other employer. G. Controlling director means a director of an employer who was before the 6th of April 1973 a controlling director, as defined in Section 624(3) of the 1988 Act, of that employer. H. Final remuneration means the greater of I. The highest remuneration upon which tax liability has been determined for any one of the 5 years preceding the relevant date being the aggregate of I. The basic pay for the year in question, and 2. The yearly average over 3 or more consecutive years ending with the expiry of the corresponding basic pay year of any fluctuating emoluments, provided that fluctuating emoluments of a year other than the basic pay year may be increased in proportion to the increase in the index from the last day of that year up to the last day of the basic pay year. Remuneration that is received after the relevant date and upon which tax liability has been determined will be treated as a fluctuating emolument, providing it was earned or qualified for prior to the relevant date. In these circumstances it may be included provided the yearly average of 3 or more consecutive years begins no later than the commencement of the basic pay year, or 2. The yearly average of the total emoluments from the employer which are assessable to income tax under Case I or II of Schedule E and upon which tax liability has been determined for any 3 or more consecutive years ending not earlier than 10 years before the relevant date. Where such emoluments are received after the relevant date but are earned or qualified for prior to that date, they may be included provided that in these circumstances the yearly average of 3 or more consecutive years begins no later than the commencement of the year ending with the relevant date. Provided that I. Remuneration and total emoluments do not include any amounts which arise from the acquisition or disposal of shares or any interest in shares or from a right to acquire shares, except where the shares or right to or interest in shares which give rise to such an amount liable to tax under Schedule E had been acquired before the 17th of March 1987, or anything in respect of which tax is chargeable by virtue of Section 148 of the 1988 Act. 2. In relation to a special director, final remuneration shall be the amount ascertained in accordance with subparagraph 2, above and subparagraph I, above shall not apply. 3. In relation to any other member whose remuneration in any year subsequent to the 5th of April 1987 used for the purpose of calculating benefits has exceeded £100,000, or such other figure as may be prescribed by the Treasury, final remuneration shall not exceed the amount ascertained in accordance with subparagraph 2, above and subparagraph I, above shall not apply, unless the individual chooses to adopt £100,000, or such other figure as may be prescribed by the Treasury. 4. Where final remuneration is computed by reference to any year other than the last complete year ending on the relevant date, the member's remuneration or total emoluments of any year may be increased in proportion to any increase in the index from the last day of that year up to the relevant date, but this proviso shall not apply to the calculation of the maximum lump sum retirement benefit in accordance with paragraph 3 of this rule unless, and subject to proviso v. below, the member's aggregate retirement benefit is similarly increased beyond the maximum amount which could be paid but for this proviso and / or the proviso to subparagraph I, 2, above, and then only to the same proportionate extent. V. For 1989 members or new tax regime members, final remuneration shall not exceed the permitted maximum. 6. For the purpose of calculating the maximum lump sum retirement benefit of a 1987 member, final remuneration shall not in any event exceed £100,000, or such other figure as may be prescribed by the Treasury. 7. An employee who remains, or is treated as remaining, in service but by reason of incapacity is in receipt of a much reduced remuneration, such as under a sick pay or permanent health insurance scheme, for more than 10 years up to the relevant date, may calculate final remuneration under subparagraph I, or 2, above with the final remuneration calculated at the cessation of normal pay and increased in accordance with the index. 8. The total amount of any profit-related pay, whether relieved from income tax or not, may be classed as pensionable remuneration and treated as a fluctuating emolument. 9. An early retirement pension in payment from the employer may not be included in final remuneration. Fluctuating emoluments means any part of an employee's earnings which are not paid on a fixed basis and are additional to the basic wage or salary. They include overtime, commission, bonuses or benefits in kind as long as they are assessable to tax under Case I or II of Schedule E and profit-related pay. Directors' fees may rank as fluctuating emoluments according to the basis on which they are voted. 2. Index means the index of retail prices published by the Department of Employment or any other index approved for the purposes of the scheme by the Board of Inland Revenue. 3. Lump sum retirement benefit means the total value of all retirement benefits payable in any form other than non-commutable pension under the scheme and any associated scheme. 4. New tax regime member means a member who has given notice pursuant to paragraph 10 of this rule. V. Permitted maximum means the figure specified in respect of the relevant year of assessment pursuant to Section 590C of the 1988 Act. 6. Pre-1987 member means a member who was a member on the 16th of March, 1987 or is deemed pursuant to regulations made by the Board of Inland Revenue to have been a member on that date and who, in either case, has not elected pursuant to paragraph 10 of this rule to become a new tax regime member. 7. Relevant date means the date of retirement, leaving service in eligible employment or death as the case may be. 8. Relevant scheme means any other scheme approved or seeking approval under Chapter I of Part 14 of the 1988 Act and in respect of a new tax regime member or a 1989 member who is a controlling director, also any retirement annuity contract or trust scheme approved under Chapter 3 of Part 14 or any personal pension scheme as approved under Chapter 4 of Part 14 of the 1988 Act insofar as it provides benefits secured by contributions in respect of relevant service. 9. Relevant service means I. In relation to a new tax regime member or a 1989 member the aggregate of a. All periods of service with an employer and b. All other periods which count in respect of any associated employment or any connected scheme. 2. In relation to a pre-1987 member or a 1987 member service with an employer. X. Remuneration means in relation to any year the aggregate of the total emoluments for the year in question from the employer and which are assessable to income tax under Schedule E but excluding any amounts which arise from the acquisition or disposal of shares or any interest in shares or a right to acquire shares or anything in respect of which tax is chargeable by virtue of Section 148 of the 1988 Act, provided that for a new tax regime member or a 1989 member there shall be disregarded any emoluments in excess of the permitted maximum. 11. Retained benefits means any benefit payable on retirement or death to a member from I. Retirement benefits schemes approved or seeking approval under Chapter I of Part 14 of the 1988 Act or relevant statutory schemes as defined in Section 611 thereof. 2. Funds to which Section 608 of the 1988 Act applies. 3. retirement benefits schemes which have been accepted by the Inland Revenue as corresponding in respect of a claim made on behalf of the member for the purposes of Section 596, 2b, of the 1988 Act. 4. Retirement annuity contracts approved under Chapter 3 of Part 14 of the 1988 Act. V. Personal pension schemes approved under Chapter 4 of Part 14 of the 1988 Act, or 6. Transfer payments from overseas schemes held in a type of arrangement defined in subparagraph I, 4, or v, above. In respect of previous employments or periods of self-employment, whether alone or in partnership. 12. Special director means a member who, at any time on or after the 17th of March, 1987 and in the last 10 years before the relevant date has, in relation to the employer, been both within the definition of a director in Section 612(1) of the 1988 Act and within paragraph B of Section 417(5) of that Act. 13. 1987 member means a member who became a member on or after the 17th of March, 1987 and before the 1st of June, 1989, and any member deemed pursuant to regulations made by the Board of Inland Revenue to have become a member during that period who has not elected to become a new tax regime member pursuant to paragraph 10 of this rule, or a 1989 member pursuant to paragraph 29 of Part 2 of Schedule 6 to the Finance Act 1989. 14. 1989 member means a member who became a member on or after the 1st of June, 1989 and is not deemed pursuant to regulations made by the Board of Inland Revenue to have been a member at any time prior to that date, or a 1987 member who has elected pursuant to paragraph 29 of Part 2 of Schedule 6 to the Finance Act 1989. Guaranteed minimum pensions. 9. 1. This rule shall apply if any employment guaranteed minimum pensions. 9. 1. This rule shall apply if any employment becomes contracted out employment by reference to the scheme, and it shall then override any other provisions of the scheme, the rules and the schedules to the rules, and in particular, but without prejudice to the generality of the foregoing, or subparagraph A, of paragraph 3, and paragraph 6, of Rule 16, subparagraph A, I, of paragraph 2, and paragraph 5, of Rule 33, Rule 34 and paragraphs 4, and 5, of Rule 41, if and insofar as they are inconsistent with it. 2. The words and expressions used in this rule shall have the same meanings as in the Pensions Act. 3. Subject to the provisions of paragraph 4, of Rule 19, any entitlement of a member and or alternatively, as the case may be, any other beneficiary concerned under the provisions of this rule shall be inclusive of any entitlement under any other provisions of the scheme, the rules or the schedules to the rules other than any entitlement to equivalent pension benefits for the purposes of Part 3 of the National Insurance Act 1965 and the previous corresponding enactments. 4. If an earner has a guaranteed minimum in relation to the pension provided for him under the scheme in accordance with Section 35 of the Pensions Act. A. The weekly rate of the pension from age 65 for a man and 60 for a woman shall not be less than the guaranteed minimum. B. If the earner is a man and dies at any time leaving a widow, the weekly rate of the pension provided for her under the scheme unless and until she remarries under the age of 60 shall not be less than half that earner's guaranteed minimum. C. If the earner is a woman and dies on or after the 6th of April, 1989 leaving a widower, he shall be entitled, unless and until he remarries under the age of 65, to a pension at a weekly rate of not less than half of that part of the earner's guaranteed minimum, which is attributable to earnings for the tax year 1988/89 and subsequent tax years. 4 am. The guaranteed minimum pensions referred to in paragraph 4 shall, insofar as they are attributable to earnings in the tax years from, and including, 1988/89, be increased on becoming payable in accordance with Section 37 of the Pensions Act and to the extent of any orders made thereunder. 5. Commencement or payment of an earner's guaranteed minimum pension shall be postponed or suspended as the case may be for any period during which he is under the age of 70 for a man or 65 for a woman and is in employment to which the scheme applies. 6. Where the commencement or payment of an earner's guaranteed minimum pension is postponed or suspended for any period in accordance with paragraph 5 of this rule, his guaranteed minimum pension shall be increased to the extent, if any, specified in sections 35, 6, 6am, and 6b, of the Pensions Act. 7a. A guaranteed minimum pension payable by virtue of this rule shall be capable of being forfeited, terminated or suspended during the lifetime of the person to whom it is payable in accordance with subparagraph b of paragraph 4, or paragraph 5. Of this rule or otherwise in such circumstances as are for the time being prescribed by regulations made under section 39, 4b, of the Pensions Act but in no other circumstances. b. The liability of the scheme to pay any such guaranteed minimum pension shall during that lifetime be capable of being terminated or suspended in such circumstances as are from time to time permitted or otherwise provided for by the Pensions Act but in no other circumstances. c. Notwithstanding anything in Rule 23, where an earner who has become entitled to a guaranteed minimum pension by virtue of this rule re-enters employment to which the scheme applies, his rights to such pension shall not be terminated but shall have effect subject to the provisions of paragraphs 5 and 6 of this rule. d. Section 48 of the Pensions Act shall apply in relation to any guaranteed minimum pension payable by virtue of this rule. 8. If an employer or from the 6th of April 1987 the Committee of Management makes an election under Section 42 of the Pensions Act, he or they shall be bound to pay a contributions equivalent premium with a view to extinguishing accrued rights to guaranteed minimum pensions or a guaranteed minimum pension in any case where the Pensions Act so permits, provided that a. The employer or the Committee of Management, as the case may be, may but shall not be bound so to do. I. Where the amount of the contributions equivalent premium would not exceed £5, or 2. In any case for the time being prescribed for the purposes of Section 43, 4, of the Pensions Act, but b. In respect of any of the cases mentioned in Proviso A. 2, above, the employer shall not discriminate between different earners falling within the same class of case. 9. If a state scheme premium is paid in respect of a member under Section 43, 4, of the Pensions Act and the scheme's liability to provide guaranteed minimum pension benefits in respect of such member is cancelled, the benefits in respect of the member under the scheme shall be reduced accordingly, and any ancillary benefits, contingent on death or otherwise, which are related to the amount of guaranteed minimum pension benefits concerned shall cease to be payable except insofar as the principal employer in their discretion decide otherwise. Cessation of membership. 9b. If a member exercises his right to discontinue his membership of the scheme, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 1am, his service in eligible employment and contributing service shall be deemed for the purposes of the rules as having terminated on the date of such discontinuance in accordance with the provisions of Rule 15. This rule shall override any other provisions of the scheme, the rules and the schedules to the rules insofar as they are inconsistent with it. Normal retirement. 10.1. Subject as hereinafter provided, benefit shall be payable under this rule to a member on retirement from eligible employment on or after the 6th of April 1975 on or after attaining pensionable age and before the transfer date. 2. Subject as hereinafter provided, the benefit payable under this rule to a member having qualifying service of 5 years or more shall be a pension comprising the aggregate of such of the following weekly amounts as shall be applicable. AAA, A weekly amount consisting of 1/60th of the amount of the member's pensionable earnings for each complete year of the member's contributing service and 1/52nd part of 1/60th of the amount of the member's pensionable earnings for each week of such contributing service not thus taken into account, provided that the maximum period of contributing service to be taken into account for the purpose of this subparagraph in relation to a member shall be 40 complete years, with the option of electing to take a lump sum payment in accordance with the provisions of paragraph 5 of this rule. C. A weekly amount consisting in respect of the periods specified in column 2, and any subsequent column of the 7th schedule of the amounts shown in those columns respectively against item 1 of that schedule for each complete year of the member's service in eligible employment during the period from the 6th of January 1964 to the 5th of April 1975, and of the amounts so shown divided by 52 for each week of such service not thus taken into account. D. A weekly amount consisting in respect of the periods specified in column 2, and any subsequent column of the 7th schedule of the amounts shown in those columns respectively against item 2 of that schedule for each complete year of the member's service in eligible employment during the period from the 3rd of April 1961 to the 5th of January 1964, and of the amounts so shown divided by 52 for each week of such service not thus taken into account. E. If the member has units standing to his credit, representing service before the 3rd of April 1961, a weekly amount consisting in respect of the periods specified in column 2, and any subsequent column of the 7th schedule of the amounts shown in those columns respectively against item 3 of that schedule for every such unit. F. If the total of I. the aggregate of the weekly amounts ascertained in accordance with subparagraphs A to E of this paragraph, and 2. the weekly rate of any graduated pension payable to the member under the Social Security legislation so far as such pension is attributable to the members having been treated under Section 58 of the National Insurance Act as having paid graduated contributions to the National Insurance Fund in respect of service with an employer in eligible employment or service in respect of which the member has paid contributions to the staff scheme, and 3. the weekly amount of any other pension payable to the member under the rules, other than Rule 9 AM, so far as such pension is in respect of service in eligible employment on or after the 3rd of April 1961, and 4. in the case of a member who, having been a contributor to the staff scheme, transfers to eligible employment on or after the 3rd of April 1961, the weekly amount of any pension payable to the member under the staff scheme is in respect of the periods specified in column 2, and any subsequent column of Part I of the 5th schedule, less than the weekly amounts shown in those columns respectively against item 2 of Part I of that schedule in relation to the member's period of qualifying service, the difference between the said total and that amount. 3. Subject as hereinafter provided, the benefit payable under this rule to a member having qualifying service of less than 5 years shall be a pension comprising the aggregate of such of the following weekly amounts as shall be applicable. A. A weekly amount calculated in accordance with subparagraphs AAA, C, and D, of paragraph 2, of this rule, and B. If the member has units standing to his credit, representing service before the 3rd of April 1961, a weekly amount representing the weekly pension payable to the member actuarially equivalent to the lump sum, if any, of the amount shown in the second schedule according to the number of units standing to his credit, with compound interest at 3% per annum from the 3rd of April 1961 to the date on which the member attains pensionable age. 5. A member whose service in eligible employment terminates on or after the 1st of March 1992 may, prior to his pension becoming payable, elect to commute within the inland revenue limits up to 25% of his pension for a lump sum payment on the basis of £9 for each £1 of pension commuted. Deferred retirement. 11.1. Subject as hereinafter provided, A member who on or after the 1st of April 1990 remains in eligible employment after attaining pensionable age shall on retirement from eligible employment be entitled to receive the same benefits in all respects as he would have received if he had retired on attaining pensionable age, but increased by such amount as the Committee of Management acting on the advice of the actuary may determine. 1 a.m. A member who attained pensionable age before the transfer date and who is in eligible employment on the day immediately before the transfer date and does not retire on that day shall be deemed to retire on that day and shall receive benefits calculated in accordance with Rule 10, increased with effect from the transfer date in accordance with the provisions of this rule if appropriate. 2. No increase in benefit shall be provided by this rule unless the member's retirement from eligible employment shall be deferred by at least one complete year after pensionable age and thereafter shall be increased by such further amount as the Committee of Management acting on the advice of the actuary may determine in respect of each complete week of deferment. 3. In calculating any increase of benefit under this rule, a. The period of deferment in relation to a member shall be deemed to commence on the date on which the member attains pensionable age and to terminate on the date on which his service in eligible employment terminates or is deemed to terminate, and b. Not more than 5 years of deferment shall be taken into account in relation to any member. 4. A member who shall have attained either the age of 62 on or before the 1st of April 1990 or the age of 60 on or before the 1st of March 1992 and who shall continue in eligible employment after those respective dates shall be entitled on the termination of his service in eligible employment to receive a pension calculated in accordance with paragraph 2 of Rule 10 but increased in accordance with the provisions of this rule. Incapacity retirement. 12.1. Subject as hereinafter provided. Incapacity retirement. 12.1. Subject as hereinafter provided. Benefit shall be payable under this rule to a member who retires from eligible employment on or after the 6th of April 1975 and before attaining pensionable age and before the transfer date if he is certified by the principal employer's medical advisor to be so incapacitated as a result of accident or ill health that he is unable and likely to remain unable to undertake any form of employment that his employer, other than a recognized trade union, is able to offer him, or if there is no such form of employment, the form of employment in eligible employment upon which he was last engaged. 1 a.m. Subject as hereinafter provided. Benefit shall be payable under paragraph 2 of this rule to a member who satisfies the requirements specified in paragraph 1 of this rule if I. He has qualifying service of 5 years or more, or 2. The Committee of Management in their discretion determine that he shall be treated for the purposes of this rule as if he had 5 years qualifying service, and 1b, notwithstanding paragraph 1 of this rule and subject as hereinafter provided, benefits shall be payable under this rule to a deferred pensioner who, having become a contributing member of IWS-MPS and as a consequence of incapacity while he remains such a contributing member, becomes eligible to receive and so receives benefit under that rule or those rules of that scheme as correspond to this rule 12. 2. Subject as hereinafter provided. The benefit under this paragraph shall be a pension comprising the aggregate of such of the weekly amounts as are specified in paragraph 2 of Rule 10 and payable from the date of the member's retirement from eligible employment. The provisions of subparagraph f of paragraph 2 of Rule 10 shall apply to such pension, but if the member has less than 5 years qualifying service he shall be deemed to have 5 years qualifying service. 3. In any case where the principal employer's medical advisor is unable to certify that the member's incapacity is likely to be permanent, the Committee of Management may in their discretion make a provisional award of a pension, calculated as provided in paragraph 2 of this rule, for such period and subject to such conditions as the Committee of Management may determine, but without prejudice to his rights under any other provisions of the rules in respect of any period after the termination of his service in eligible employment during which such pension is not payable. 5. A member entitled to benefit under this rule and who retires from eligible employment on or after the 1st of March, 1992 may elect in accordance with the provisions of paragraph 5 of Rule 10. Incapacity retirement, special cases. 13.1. Subject as hereinafter provided, a member shall be entitled to a pension under this rule on retirement from eligible employment on or after the 6th of April, 1975 and before the transfer date. A. If he satisfies the conditions specified in paragraph 1 of Rule 15 of the rules as they had effect immediately before the 6th of April, 1975, and B. Where I. He retires from eligible employment on or after the 6th of April, 1978, and 2. He does not upon such retirement become entitled to benefit under Rule 27 or any benefit payable in lieu thereof by virtue of paragraph 2 of that rule, and 3. His period of contracted out employment by reference to the scheme, within the meaning of Section 42(1) of the Pensions Act, is less than 5 years. If he elects for benefit under this rule. 2. The benefit payable under this rule shall be calculated and paid in accordance with the provisions of the said Rule 15, save that a. For the reference to the amount of £1.20 specified in paragraph 4 of the said rule there shall be substituted in respect of the periods specified in column 2, and any subsequent column of Part I of the 5th Schedule references to the amounts shown in those columns respectively against item 3 of Part I of that schedule. B. For each reference in the said rule to a week before or a week after the member retires, or is deemed to retire, for the purposes of the National Insurance Act, there shall be substituted a reference to a week before or a week after, as the case may be, the date upon which the member attains pensionable age. C. The references to Rules 10, 10, 1, D, 10, 1, F, 14, 3, C, and 14, 5, B, shall be construed as references to the provisions so designated in the rules as they had effect immediately before the 6th of April, 1975. D. For the references to Rule 14, 3, and to Rule 17 respectively there shall be substituted references to Rule 12, 4, and to subparagraph B of paragraph 4 of Rule 9 am, and Rule 16 of the rules as they have effect at any time on and after the 6th of April, 1975, and E. For the avoidance of doubt it is declared that I. Any reference in the said Rule 15 to the Industrial Injuries Scheme shall be construed as including references to Rule 14 and to any provision of the Industrial Injuries Deed providing for payment of benefits in respect of those which would have been payable under the Industrial Injuries Scheme but for its termination, and 2. Any reference in the said Rule 15 to supplementary disablement pension under the Industrial Injuries Scheme shall be construed as including references to any pension payable under Rule 14 or payable pursuant to Clause 3 of the Industrial Injuries Deed in respect of any supplementary disablement pension which would have been payable under the Industrial Injuries Scheme but for its termination. Incapacity retirement, industrial disablement. 14.1. Where a member A. Retires from eligible employment on or after the 6th of April, 1975 and before the transfer date, and B. Satisfies the requirements specified in paragraph 1 of Rule 12, and C. Suffers from loss of physical or mental faculty resulting from an industrial accident which occurs, or an industrial disease which develops, on or after the 30th of March, 1970, and D. Is, at the time such accident occurs or industrial disease develops, a member of the scheme who has not given notice and ceased to pay normal contributions pursuant to paragraph 1 of Rule 1 am or a member of the Industrial Death and Retirement Scheme. The provisions of this rule shall apply in relation to him. 2. A. Where the provisions of this rule apply in relation to a member, he shall be entitled to a pension under this rule and not to a pension under Rule 12 or Rule 13 in respect of any period not earlier than his retirement from eligible employment during which the degree of disablement resulting from the loss of faculty referred to in subparagraph C of paragraph 1 of this rule will be treated, for the purposes of the provisions of the Social Security legislation relating to industrial injuries and industrial diseases, as not less than 50% provided that where the member is suffering also from loss of faculty as a result of a colliery accident or colliery disease, then if he so opts by notice in writing to the pensions officer within 3 months after the option date, the degree of disablement resulting from such loss shall be taken into account for the purpose of this paragraph with effect from the option date. b. For the purposes of this paragraph, the option date means a date on or after the member's retirement from eligible employment being the earliest date with effect from which, in the circumstances then existing, he could become entitled to a pension by exercising an option under this paragraph. 3. The benefit payable under this rule shall be a pension consisting of whichever shall be applicable of the following weekly amounts. A. For the period until the date on which the member attains pensionable age, whichever shall be the greater of I. The weekly amount consisting in respect of the periods specified in column 2, and any subsequent column of the fifth schedule of the amounts shown in those columns respectively against item 4, of part I of that schedule and against the degree of the member's disablement which, for the time being, is taken into account for the purpose of paragraph 1 of this rule, disregarding any degree of disablement in respect of which the member has received a supplementary disablement gratuity under the Industrial Injuries Scheme or has received benefit pursuant to Clause 3 of the Industrial Injuries Deed in respect of any supplementary disablement gratuity to which he would have been entitled under the Industrial Injuries Scheme but for its termination, increased for any week in respect of which he is in receipt of an allowance under Section 63 of the Social Security Act by the weekly amount consisting in respect of the periods specified in column 2, and any subsequent column of the fifth schedule of the amounts shown in those columns respectively against item 5 of part I of that schedule, and 2. The weekly amount of the pension which would apart from this rule be payable to him for such period under Rule 12 or Rule 13, and b. For the period beginning with the date on which the member attains pensionable age, whichever shall be the greater of I. The rate mentioned in subparagraph a of this paragraph, and 2. A weekly amount equal to the aggregate of the weekly amounts specified in subparagraphs a, I, and a. 2, of this paragraph but not exceeding the aggregate of the weekly amount specified in subparagraph a, I, of this paragraph and a weekly amount of £1.50. 4. The degree of disablement taken into account for the purposes of this rule shall not exceed 100%, nor shall it exceed the difference between 100% and the degree of disablement in respect of which the member is entitled for the time being to a supplementary disablement pension under the Industrial Injuries Scheme, a pension under Rule 14 or benefit payable pursuant to Clause 3 of the Industrial Injuries Deed in respect of any supplementary disablement pension to which he would have been entitled under the Industrial Injuries Scheme but for its termination. 5. If before the transfer date a member to whom a pension is payable under this rule returns to eligible employment or to other regular whole-time employment with the principal employer or a small mine licensee, he shall not be entitled to a pension under this rule in respect of any period after such return, but this shall not prevent his becoming entitled to such a pension in respect of a subsequent period if he retires again from eligible employment and in respect of such retirement satisfies the requirements of paragraph 1 of this rule. Disablement, colliery accidents and diseases. 14 adopt 1, where at any time on or after the 1st of January 1978 a pension has become payable to a member or other person under any other provision of the rules, including the rules as they had effect at any time before that date, and b. But for the termination of the Industrial Injuries Scheme a supplementary disablement pension would have been payable to him under that scheme. c. No commutation of benefits otherwise payable to him has taken place under or in pursuance of Clause 4 of the Industrial Injuries Deed. He shall, if he so elects before the transfer date, be entitled to receive as a pension under this rule the amount of the supplementary disablement pension to which he would have been entitled under the Industrial Injuries Scheme but for its termination. 2. For the purposes of paragraph 1 of this rule, supplementary disablement pension means a pension which was or would but for the termination of the Industrial Injuries Scheme have been supplementary disablement pension within the meaning of that scheme. Optional early retirement. 14b.1. Subject to the provisions of paragraphs 4 and 5 of this rule, a member whose service in eligible employment terminates on or after the 1st of March 1992 shall be entitled to exercise the option conferred by this rule. 2. A member shall have the option exercisable by giving written notice to the Committee of Management at any time after the date of termination of service in eligible employment and pre or to attainment of pensionable age of receiving a benefit under this rule prior to pensionable age, provided that no such option shall be exercisable before the member shall attain the age of 50 and no such benefit shall be payable with effect from a date earlier than the date of the member's 50th birthday. Any such notice may be revoked by a member giving written notice to that effect to the Committee of Management at any time prior to the commencement of payment of the benefit under this rule. 3. The benefit payable under this rule shall be calculated in accordance with the provisions of Rule 10, but the amount payable will be of such reduced amount as the Committee of Management, on the advice of the actuary and before the transfer date with the agreement of the principal employer, shall determine, having regard to its earlier commencement, provided that no such reduction shall be applied to the benefit payable to any member who shall have attained the age of 59 when his or her service in eligible employment terminates. 4. Benefit shall not be payable under the provisions of paragraph 3 of this rule unless the Committee of Management, on the advice of the actuary, are satisfied that the pension payable to the member at state pensionable age will not be less than the guaranteed minimum pension payable under Rule 9 am. 5. A member shall not be entitled to exercise the option conferred by this rule if upon termination of service in eligible employment the member becomes entitled to benefit under Rule 12, 13 or 14, or if the member has given written notice pursuant to Rule 1 am. Leveling option. 14c. Subject as hereinafter provided, at the option of a member who is in eligible employment and has attained the age of 59 or more and who has become entitled to benefits under Rule 10, whether or not increased under Rule 11, Rule 12 or Rule 14b, the Committee of Management may determine that the amount of such members' benefits shall until state pensionable age be increased and thereafter be reduced by such amounts as may be determined by the Committee of Management after consulting the actuary and before the transfer date as may be approved by the principal employer and based on the amount of the single person's retirement pension payable by the state under the provisions of the Social Security Act 1975 at the time of the determination, provided that I. The member shall notify the Committee of Management in writing of his intention to exercise the option contained in this rule at the time the pension becomes payable. 2. Any exercise of the option contained in this rule shall be irrevocable. 3. The rates of reduction and increase determined by the Committee of Management to be applicable to a member who has exercised the option contained in this rule shall be fixed and shall remain unaltered despite any increase in the rates of pension, save that the Committee of Management shall, in the case of a member who has retired before pensionable age having exercised the said option and who subsequently re-enters service in eligible employment, adjust the rates applicable to his normal benefits on his subsequent retirement, and the benefits payable on attaining pensionable age will be actuarially adjusted in respect of the first retirement. 4. The Committee of Management may at their discretion require a member wishing to exercise the option contained in this rule to provide evidence of normal health having regard to the age of the member as may be required before the transfer date by the principal employer, or on and after the transfer date by the principal employer's medical advisor. V. The option contained in this rule shall be exercisable only if in the opinion of the actuary the pension payable after the member's state pensionable age shall not be less than the guaranteed minimum pension payable under Rule 9am. 6. For the purpose of calculating benefits payable on the death of a member, any option exercised under this rule shall be ignored. Termination of service. 15.1. Subject as hereinafter provided. Benefit shall be payable under this rule to any member whose service in eligible employment terminates otherwise than by reason of death and who does not upon such termination become entitled to benefit under any of the preceding rules, other than Rule 9am. 2a. Benefit shall be payable under this paragraph to a member whose service in eligible employment terminates on or after the 6th of April 1975. If the member has qualifying service of 5 years or more and the termination of his service in eligible employment is not due to and does not arise out of his misconduct or his voluntary withdrawal, and 2. If at the date of such termination the member has attained the age of 50. b. The benefit payable under this paragraph shall be a pension consisting of a weekly amount calculated in accordance with paragraph 2 of Rule 10. c. The pension payable under this paragraph shall be payable from the date on which the member attains pensionable age. 4a. Benefit shall be payable under this paragraph to a member whose service in eligible employment terminates on or after the 6th of April 1975. If he does not become entitled to benefit under any of the preceding provisions of this rule, and 2. If either the member has qualifying service of 2 years or more, or 2. The termination of his service in eligible employment takes place on the transfer date and the member becomes a member of IWS, MPS for future service benefits with effect from the day after the transfer date. b. The benefit payable to a member under this paragraph shall be a pension consisting of a weekly amount calculated in accordance with paragraph 3 of Rule 10 payable from the date on which the member attains pensionable age. 5a. Benefit shall be payable under this paragraph to a member whose service in eligible employment terminates on or after the 6th of April 1978. If he does not become entitled to benefit under any of the preceding provisions of this rule or to benefit under Rule 27 or any benefit payable in lieu thereof by virtue of paragraph 2 of that rule, and 2. If he has qualifying service of less than 2 years. b. The benefit payable to a member under this paragraph shall consist of the following. A refund of the total amount of the contributions payable by or in respect of him under Rule 3 or Rule 4 in relation to any period of his contributing service, and 2. Where his service in eligible employment commenced prior to the 6th of April 1975, the lump sum, if any, and a refund of his contributions, if any, in accordance with the rules as they had effect immediately before the 1st of April 1990. c. Where benefit is payable to any person under this paragraph, and a contributions equivalent premium falls to be paid in respect of him, the amount of benefit payable under subparagraph b. of this paragraph shall, pursuant to Section 47(7) of the Pensions Act, be reduced by the amount, if any, which the employer is entitled to recover pursuant to Section 47 of the Pensions Act. 7. A member entitled to benefit under this rule and whose service in eligible employment terminates on or after the 1st of March 1992 may elect in accordance with the provisions of paragraph 5 of Rule 10. 8. Where a member has attained the age of 60 on the 1st of March 1992 but payment of his pension under this rule has not commenced, his pension under this rule shall be payable with effect from that date unless he was entitled to receive a pension from an earlier date under the scheme and rules as they had effect immediately prior to the 1st of March 1992.